So, you've just started to learn chess, have you? You've binge-watched the Queen's Gambit, watched a few high IQ streamers battle it out, and rattled through a few Gotham chess videos, and now you think you're ready for the big leagues. You'll think you're a reasonably competent individual. You're probably the go-to person in your household for difficult tasks like fixing the Wi-Fi, formatting a Word document, or working out where to plug a HDMI cable in. You think to yourself, how hard can chess be? It's time my high IQ brain wipes the floor with these dweebs. You create an account on chess.com and start to play a few games, when suddenly you come to the realisation that you're pretty terrible at chess. It doesn't start so bad. You lose to a 500 ELO player and you tell yourself they got lucky. They're cheating. I mouse slipped. And then you go for another game and lose, and another, and lose, and another. I think you get the picture. This is when reality sets in. Maybe you're not as good as you think you are. Maybe your opponent was using an engine. But if you've lost to a 400 rated player called GM Smack My Bishop, who began by playing moves like pawn to h4 and developing their queen to some godforsaken square and saying GG easy, then maybe it's time to look at yourself in the mirror, own up to your faults, repent your chess sins and look for salvation. This is where I come in. I'm your new chess teacher and I'll help you ELO point by ELO point. You're safe now. Our first order of business in this video is to fix your white opening. They say you can't polish a turd, but you definitely can roll it up in glitter, make it look fabulous and teach it how to play chess. I'm going to suggest you play pawn to e4 as your first move. With this you can get some very interesting attacking positions which will increase your knowledge exponentially. There's also some guy who said it was the best by test. You could try and play something strategic like pawn to d4, knight to f3 or pawn to c4, but I will hold this against you and most of your opponents will call you a horrendously dull person, even if you won't say it to your face. Today after pawn to e4 and your opponent plays pawn to e5, instead of getting into too much theory, I'm going to suggest we play the Danish Gambit. Like a Danish pastry, the Gambit involves a sweet and flaky move, but it's also a bold choice. First we play pawn to e4, black plays pawn to e5, and we hit them straight away with our bold strategy of pawn to d4. If black refuses the offer, it's time to punish them hard. If they play knight to c6, we'll hit the knight with d5. If black jumps to d4 with their knight, it's horsey heaven for this pony, as pawn to c3 kills the knight and it has nowhere to run. Instead, after d5, there are two moves the knight could go to. Knight to b4 is one option, but have no fear, we will simply kick it away with a3, and after knight a6 we're going to build a better wall than Donald Trump by playing pawn to b4. And after knight to f6 we'll defend with bishop to d3, they'll play bishop e7 and we'll play c4. The Great Wall of China is an impressive feat of engineering but has nothing on a solid pawn structure in chess. Lastly, knight to e7 was also an option. Here I would recommend a classic h-pawn push, pawn to h4, with the idea after knight to g6 we will push Harry further with h5. Take that. Once the knight retreats back to e7 we further control the centre with c4. Don't worry your precious little head about developing pieces here. White is dominating the board. For instance, after pawn to d6 we will play the aggressive f4, and after knight f6 we finally develop with knight to c3 and white has an incredibly strong position. Going back to the Danish, ignoring d4 isn't good, so black will almost always take. After taking, we finally get into our succulent opening. We'll play pawn to c3, offering black a free pawn for incredibly speedy development. Black can again attempt to ignore c3 with moves like d5 or d3, but both attempts are fine for white. If d5, we take on d5, queen takes d5, pawn takes d4, knight c6, bishop e4, knight f6 and knight c3, and we simply say, is that all you've got? Pawn to d3 is even better for us because the bishop will take on d3. After d5 we defend with knight to d2, knight f6 is best, but again we develop with knight to f3. After black takes on e4 we take back with the knight, and after black takes we play the sneaky queen to a4 check, avoiding exchanging queens and picking up the knights on e4 with a nice position. So if black avoids all the cowardly ways to wriggle out of our Danish, they are left with the only viable option, which is to accept the gambits with pawn takes c3. We now develop swiftly with knight takes c3. Black could play literally anything in this position. They could play an outrageous a5, a godlike g5, or an engine inspired king to e7. Instead, knight to c6 is the main move here, and we will respond with rapid development and bishop c4. They'll develop their knight to f6, and we also develop our piece with knight to f3, and black has two main options in this position. If your opponent is a fanboy of the Sigma Chad Grandmaster Alexander Grishuk, then they may play pawn to d6 in this situation. If this happens, we'll develop our beautiful queen to b3 and hit black's pawns on f7, forcing them to defend with queen to d7, and we'll attack once more with knight to g5. Knight to e5 is basically forced. If they don't play that, they're getting crushed on f7. Now we're into some Grandmaster level prep, but just continue with bishop to b5. They have to play pawn to c6, and we counter with pawn to f4. After a series of captures, pawn takes b5, pawn takes knight, and bishop to e3. If you know how to count, you'll realise that we are now 2 pawns down, but with a dominant position. If black tries to hold onto their pawn with pawn to a6, we'll play rook to d1, and after queen to e7, we play bishop c5. This way you show them where the resign button is, because black is getting crushed again on f7. Going back to this position, if your opponent is into Grishuk, they may play the more obvious bishop to b4. Now, instead of sitting back like a coward like you always do, we're going to go for this game with pawn to e5, hitting their knight. Black can of course take on c3, and we will recapture, and there are a lot of ways for black to go wrong. Unless your opponent is rated 2000 plus elo, they are probably going to fall for the traps here. To cover all bases, black should play d5, leading to an unbalanced position. After pawn takes knight, pawn takes bishop, queen takes queen, knight recaptures and pawn takes g7, rook g8 and bishop to h6 to protect the pawn. If they try to be clever with knight to e6, we're one step ahead. We'll castle queenside, let them take the pawn and play rook to e1 check. We're a pawn down, sure, but now we have great chances for an advantage, especially at the low elo level. Don't those two rooks look scary in the centre like that? Playing d5 here though is some master level prep. Instead it's more likely they'll play knight to e4 or knight to g4. If knight to e4, they've just blundered. Play queen d5, hitting f7 and the knight at the same time. Look at the sweat and disappointment on your opponent's face. Relish in it. Knight g4 is also inaccurate, because we now have the vicious blow bishop takes f7, king takes, and now knight g5 check, and make sure to say check really loud to put them off. King to e8, and we retake with queen takes g4, they'll take on e5 and we'll play queen h5 check with a better position. Yes, we're a pawn down, but material isn't everything. White's plan is simply to castle and get the rooks in the game. Black can no longer castle and is in for a sweaty game. This has been the Danish Gambit opening. To tie up loose ends, I should also mention the best move after pawn to e5 to hit the knight is black to play pawn to d5. Again though, we get a similar position to previous variations when we take on f6 and take on c4 and we swap queens, take on g7 and play bishop to h6. If you really want to get good at this opening, I suggest you input all these moves into Lee Chess or chess.com and have a look at these lines with an engine and play some games. Yes, to improve, you're going to have to do some of your own self-study and actually do some active learning. I'm sorry to drop this truth bomb, but did you honestly think binging Gotham chess and Agadmeta videos would increase your elo all by itself? For more chess tutorials in the future, please subscribe to the channel. See you next time for more lessons to push up your elo.